This is update for August 5, 2023, day 528 of the war, end of the date update. Also catch up for August 3 and 4. I'm going to start with general sort of strategic updates as I always do, and then we're going to switch to the situation in Ukraine and also on the front line. Sorry for that. So as you can see, first I'm kind of want to provide quick update on what's going on in the US banking system. In short, situation remains in remission. As I said before, no essential changes. There is no sort of call it healing, but there is no escalation in the problem. As you can see, the total borrowing slightly declining slightly, very slowly every week. The interest rates remain sort of range bound. They're not going really up, not really going down. No clear picture, let's put this way. Now, the deposit situation in the US banking system is, as you can see, also kind of, I wouldn't call it totally stable. It looks like another leg down, but so far it's hard to say that this is true until we break these lows that we've seen in April. So far, things still kind of contained here as well. Now let's switch to the economic situation, macroeconomic situation around the world, and it actually not that great in a nutshell. But with exception, and I think that's a good exception for most, is that the job market remains strong pretty much everywhere I would say pretty much everywhere, including Russia. So there is quite a bit of data that came out from the US. So first of all, job cuts, the number is going down from 40,000 to 23,000 in July. So this clearly not a sign of weakness in the job market in the US. Continuing job claims remain more or less in the same range, not really going down much, not really spiking the same as initial jobless claims. So it's this initial ones, it's when people just getting unemployed and they make the sort of initial filing for the unemployment benefits. And continuing means that people can, has been already for a while on this unemployment benefits. Then also very positive development in the US is the jump in productivity. If you remember, a while ago I spoke that this is the most dangerous sign of overall decline and threat literally to the society. This actually kind of shows that the trend has, well, I don't know if it's reversed, but it's the first initial sign, first sort of positive print in productivity. We'll see if it remains, if it's a trend, if it turns into a trend, but the initial sign is very positive. Year on year, it's 1.3%. So basically, it's a positive. As I said, that's a very positive sign. And I would say the reason this is happening is because of the interest rates that were increased by Federal Reserve, and I would argue that that was the only main sort of reason and driver why U.S. Federal Reserve Central Bank, U.S. Central Bank was increasing interest rate to basically return positive productivity growth, because otherwise the whole system will collapse sooner or later. The only sort of initial problems or cracks in a job market is that number of hours worked declined. So this really means that demand for labor is declining from the companies, from the businesses. So that's might be initial sign of the future weakness in the labor market. Also, as you can see, that now this was sort of kind of like good part. Now we're gonna go into, I would say, almost an ugly part. Or close to it. Probably in US is not as ugly. So first of all, PMI is going down in US. Again, this is a sign that the economy is cooling down in US very quickly. So if you remember, 50 is a threshold between growth and decline. So it's quickly heading. And the problem was that this is services. This is key for the US because services is I wouldn't say it's totally all consumption, but it's where I would say most of the labor in the U.S. is employed. That's sort of driver. The key for the U.S. economy is services, and the fact that it's going in slowly, but well, not slowly, but quite a bit, moving into negative is definitely bad sign. Then again, the same confirmed by different competing companies. So there is S&P that does this polling. Then there is this ISM. So they also, as you can see, they point in the same direction. And also you can see that if you look sort of into components of this PMI, there's this basically services employment, and it went, you see huge drop in it. So which again confirms what we see here. Hours worked are starting to decline. So basically, demand for labor, again, confirmed in the US is going down. And I would say, looking at this, it's pretty quick. And this is services, right? So if this really breaks under 50 and it's really close to it, there will be probably quite a bit of layoffs in the US. And this might be a sign that in a month or 2 or 3, there could be quite a bit of layoffs in the US. And that's really going to be big problem, because services is the largest employer in the US. That's where overwhelming majority of people are employed. On the positive side, again, average hourly earnings went up 4.4%, which is higher. As you can see, core PCE 4.1. So actually, we can argue that the salaries, wages, whatever, the earnings of the people who sell their labor went up in the real terms by at least 0.3%, which is very positive, because they've been going down for a while. And again, this is, as you can see, that's all connected. You see productivity goes up, the labor also gets rewarded. Obviously, the capital gets rewarded, but in this case, basically, this tide lifts all boats, as they say, of productivity. And that's why it's so important. Also, nothing good in manufacturing in US. So you can see there are actually, they shrinking. So there are 2,000 fewer people employed in the US versus before it was growth of 6,000. So again, this is, I keep bidding on this renaissance in manufacturing. It's just not happening. That's a sort of false narrative that's being spread. There is no any kind of renaissance in manufacturing. And again, then there are 2 other data points from the government. The payrolls, they don't show anything, extraordinarily bad, as you can see. Actually, I would even argue that private employers are feeling even better, because they created 172,000 jobs in this period versus 128 in a prior period. I think this would be June. So this is July versus June. So as you can see, this is actually looks better. However, this is not confirmed by what I've said before about hours worked and employment situation. So overall, U.S. labor market, which is the linchpin of everything else, basically. So if U.S. labor market starts to deteriorate, this really means deterioration in housing prices, deterioration in the banking system. It's overall, and eventually it will lead to GDP decline, and also reduction in the government tax receipts, tax revenues, which I discussed prior time. So again, and we might be heading in that direction, and literally might be there, 1 or 2 months away from that happening so far, because it's, as I said, as a summary, it's still holding on, but there are very clear cracks that things are reversing in the negative direction in the US. Now let's move to the, I would say, ugly situation, and that would be Germany. I mentioned that Germany is in bad shape, but I believe it's actually heading to really bad shape. I would say ugly shape, and that will really be problematic politically in Germany, in my opinion. So first of all, if you look at the exports, which is primary driver of German economy, the generator of wealth, generator of employment, basically just the essence of Germany in some ways. So as you can see, export decline actually, and it's accelerating 3.8% year on year. The actually horrible part of it, and that's why I said ugly part of it, is actually export prices started to turn negative. I checked, and there were no period of negative um, export prices in at least 2023, 2022. So basically, in really bad times when exports were declining and so on, there were still prices would still go up. This is the first time, and obviously we cannot say it's a trend, but it's very clear that situation flipped from um, you know positive to very very negative. And the reason I'm saying very negative is because German exports are usually quality oriented. So this really means that the price is not the key component in the sales when the German products are sold to customers. They buy on the quality, on the features that being delivered for the customer, not on the price. They tend to be price. I wouldn't say not sensitive, but sensitivity is very low. Let's put it this way. And the fact that now German customers demanding price declines is a really, really bad sign for Germany. And it's, you can argue that the German sort of business model is completely broken. Then also import prices went down, also on accelerating pace, which is makes sense if businesses cannot export. They start, the first thing they cut, they cut their inventory, which is import. And so this is what's going on. And then also PMI in Germany also going down. So again, German situation really looks potentially turning into a very ugly picture in the coming months or quarter. So towards the end of this year, I don't know when, but if this is true, this really looks very very ugly. And again, I spoke about this alternative für Deutschland last time, and this really means that they might be the leading party in Germany towards the end of the year. Then, if we look at the overall European Union, again, services also on the edge of going negative. So it's 50.9. Again, also, I would say, ugly picture. Retail sales also down. So this is obviously, combined the whole European Union, the health of the whole sort of hospital. So that's average temperature for the hospital. So might be not the best, not the most detailed view, but doesn't sort of confirms bad situation in Germany, except in terms of services. It's apparently ahead of Germany in terms of getting closer to negative print. Let's look at a couple more countries in Europe. The same ugly print in services in the UK. So, but also heading towards negative. And again, services is a big component of GDP, big component of influencing everyone's life in the UK. So similar to the US, but not as extreme as US. Then France is already in sort of decline in this area. So overall, you can see that like France scores perfectly negative on both components, manufacturing and services. Then if we look at Italy, actually surprisingly, Italy is not as, I would say, sort of bucking a little bit the trend, or not going down as fast as everybody else. And I guess I credit it to the to Italian prime minister, or I think that's what it's called there. I think she's a pretty intelligent person, in my opinion. So again, services still, but trend is still very clear negative. The only positive in Italy is actually retail sales are up, which is obviously is a positive sign. Now let's a little bit get closer to Ukraine. So I first want to update a little bit of actually we're not gonna I guess close in some way through the Wagner connection to Ukraine. So just want to provide update on this Niger situation. So it looks like so for example Chad, which is neighboring country to the east of Niger, they already said that they're not going to be participating in any kind of intervention into Niger. They're going to be neutral. So this coalition that's being actively built by West to basically push out this Russian-controlled forces out of Niger, it's looks like it's not gonna get materialized. And at the same time, the French company that's mining uranium is still mining there. It's still working. There are 1,500 French troops there. They stay there. So in a way, it's like almost like two parallel worlds existing in Niger, and it seems like this is probably might be the situation where this the Wagner puppet government will just exist in its own world, parallel, and then French forces will exist as long as they can mine this uranium. They're not going to interfere in anything else, and that's probably what's going to happen. I'm not sure, but that's looks like a very likely scenario. But at the same time, I'm pretty sure that eventually Russia will try to send more Wagner troops there to try to really push out this 1,500 French soldiers and also take over uranium operations. But doesn't seem like that's imminent or happening soon. So I think the first order is to figure out if there will be intervention into Niger for the Russian side. Then also want to mention, talk a little bit about China and just give example of how China sort of flipping countries in the world in its own block, in its own area of influence. And the prime example is Argentina. So it's for those who don't know, it's a horrifically mismanaged country, has tons of debts and so on. So what China does is Chinese central bank basically opens the swap line, or basically lends money to Argentina government, or probably through against Argentinian central bank, and then it goes into coffers of Argentinian government, and then they use that money to repay its debts to IMF, and half of it is actually being repaid in yuan to IMF, and so now the country is basically indebted to China, right? And IMF, you can say it's proxy US. So this is sort of this kind of like a silent economic or financial war that's been going on, and in case there's a conflict, China will have huge influence over Argentina, so the Argentina stays basically neutral, and who knows, potentially could be still sending, let's say, food to China, where the food security is a big concern for Chinese top. So this is just example how it's happening, and I'm sure this is just one example, and China is sort of trying to flip these countries one by one in this fashion, and the way China is doing it is by basically earning the sort of profits from export to Europe, to the US, to the rest of the world, and then unlike many other exporters in the world, like for example Germany, Japan, who then recycle that by buying US government securities or treasuries, China doesn't do that. What they do, they actually go and buy countries around the world, and in this case it's in Latin America, but they do the same thing in Africa. Now let's actually switch. Oh, and then one other item I want to mention is very interesting observation is that U.S. stopped drawing its strategic petroleum reserve for the entire month of July. So it's at 346 million barrels, and as you can see, that doesn't help with the crude oil prices, which actively being managed by Saudi Arabia, which is also waging basically to extend economic war or energy war against the countries who basically who waging war on conventional energy. So it's kind of like mutual war in a way. Now actually let's switch to Russia first. First, I want to talk a little bit about Russian economy. It's deteriorating and rapidly, despite all of this beautiful numbers that's being produced by Russian Statistical Bureau. The best number is actually Russian exchange rate of Russian ruble, Russian currency to the US dollar. It reached a new high of 96 Russian rubles per one US dollar. So this is number that's going back to March of 2022 when invasion just started, and there was a lot of panic and so on in Russian financial markets. So basically, Russia is lost all of that ground that was sort of won initially by restraining imports and keeping most of the exports alive. So it's starting to bite, and this is obviously driven by out of control military expenses. War is expensive thing, and it tends to destroy economy, especially if you do it over a long period of time. And this, Russian ruble slowly but surely sliding is a sign that the economy is being destroyed essentially. And this is not over. This is probably going to go at least till 100 for one US dollar, and then we'll see what happens with the crude oil because. Crude remains strong thanks to Saudi Arabia, so that's sort of wild card that will determine the drive. But at the same time, if the world, as you can see, world is quickly going into the recession and potentially depression, that will definitely cut demand for crude oil and probably will force prices to go somewhat down. We'll see how it all gonna interplay. Then another economic news in Russia, and where basically Russian government decided to do windfall tax, 10% of profits for the corporations, for large companies in Russia. So this is again the sign of desperation. There is not enough money flowing through sort of normal taxation. So then the government becomes sort of starting to tax businesses out of control, basically turning into how to say, bandit on the road, basically a criminal, which is I think not surprise for most that when the government is desperate, they turn to criminality, and this is happening in Russia, and again this is a sign of desperation there. There is another law passed in Russia, a couple laws actually, that are part of this preparation for big war that I mentioned. That one of the Russian members of the parliament was talking about. So Ukrainian, war aggression against Ukraine is a small war, but really Russia is preparing for the big war. And part of that preparation is there is a law, basically that. Those who are called into the army, basically being mobilized, if you don't show up, you're gonna get slapped with 5 years in prison. And that doesn't mean that like you cannot excuse yourself, like you didn't receive the notice or anything, because notice is electronic, so you have your own account and you are supposed to check it, and that's your problem if you don't check it and you don't show up and you end up in jail. So that's sort of tightening the screws. And I mentioned before, once there is that notice in your electronic notice in your electronic account, the border, let's say, guards, I guess, they immediately get notified, and you cannot leave the country. So the sort of doors have been closed, and then there are also other like limitations. You cannot sell car, you cannot start business. Basically, you becoming sort of like a I don't know, slave. You basically no longer citizen, effectively at that point. There's another law that's being passed where, first of all, and this is about Russian children. So the school pupils, they gonna be now. The Russian government resumes civil defense courses or classes for so everybody's forced to go. When you are probably like in a ninth or 10th grade, you're probably gonna go now through the civil defense course, which is what it used to be actually in the Soviet Union. So this is really returning to Soviet Union time. And also these pupils, they will be trained as UAV pilots. So basically, again, preparation for the war. This is in high demand on the front line. There's a shortage of good quality UAV pilots for the both sides. So the Russian government decided, solving the problem this way, teaching children, and that's in a way it's a clever way to solve the problem. I have to say that. And then also there's another part of this law that's basically Russian government can force these children to do public work. So basically, if government says, "Well, we need you to go and to the factory and start making 155 or 152 millimeter shells," they're gonna go and work basically. So this is very similar to how it was in the Soviet Union during World War II, where 14-year-old, 13-year-old, 15, they would work in the factories for 12 hours with maybe like 1 day off or completely 0 days off with very poor nutrition. So again, this is very clear signs where things are going and where the Russian political top is steering the country. Then let's switch a little bit to Ukraine. So what Ukraine is trying to do now is to block Russian exports through Black Sea. There are attacks on Russian. There was on Russian crude oil tanker. I mean, it's just kind of like a tiny one, basically that can go on the river as well. But still, it's a sort of first shot in this war. So just as a summary, Russia essentially blocked Ukraine from exporting goods by destroying port infrastructure for the main part. Not 100%, but severely damaging. And Ukraine is basically hunting Russian trade cargoes and trying to destroy those. So this is basically, in some ways, it reminds me this war in Atlantic during World War II. In some ways, just how to say, history never repeats but rhymes. And sounds like this is what's going on. And for Russia, actually, these exports are significant because, so you can imagine, crude oil is a big deal for Russia, and it's a close route to where it needs to go. So it might get really problematic for Russia and really undermine its crude oil exports. And reduce profitability, because if Russia has to push everything through the Baltic Sea, that's just a longer trip, more costs, smaller profit. So this is what it is. Also, they could be affected, all other shipping of all other commodities that are still coming out of Russia. So that could be big, painful economic blow for Russia if this is done consistently and systematically. We'll see if that's going to happen or not, but I'll keep providing updates on that situation. Now a little bit more also Ukrainian internal Ukrainian situation is also deteriorating. And I would say war is the situation where everything deteriorates. Like, everybody is getting worse. It's just who is getting worse at a slower pace. That's who wins essentially. So in case of Ukraine, if you remember, I mentioned in the last video that there's basically this rats that are jumping the ship, ship being Ukraine. This political top from the Ukrainian president party that they're saying, okay, well, thank you very much. I don't want to be any more, representative in the parliament. Thank you and goodbye. And they tend to then somehow mysteriously leave the country, even though technically you cannot leave the country, but they do. And so there's another data point of this deterioration in Ukrainian sort of power structure and generally governmental structure. That there is a statistics that only 50% of Ukrainian diplomats are returning back. Basically, most of them flee. When they need to return to Ukraine, they just flee away. And in some countries, obviously in the West, that rate goes to nearly 100%. So I think in case of US, it's actually 100%. Nobody returns; they just flee. I don't know how they do that, but then again, this is a few more rats that just jumping the ship, right? They see that there is not much to loot. There's only problems coming, and they just quickly jumping the ship. And this is obviously another sign of deteriorating situation in Ukraine, and the sign of 1917 moment that's heading Ukrainian way. As I said, it's just unclear who is going to get there first, Ukraine or Russia. But both countries are firmly on that path. Now let's actually switch. I'm going to do the walk through the front line in a clockwise fashion, as I always do, starting from very north. So the situation along the state border remains more or less the same. No essential differences there. Now let's jump to the North Lugansk front line. Things here also kind of like just on the pause, only tactical fighting. The Russian sort of push here west of Kuzemikov is finally contained. Again, this was tactical push, but at the same time, Ukrainian front line was too thin, and that's a result of this very mild tactical success by the Russian side. But otherwise, situation more or less stable here. Now let's move to the North Donbass front line. Things here also quiet, nothing, just tactical sort of pushes. Really, I would say very, very quiet. Again, in the southern sector, similar situation with just some relatively weak Russian counterattacks, tactical counterattacks, where they want to recapture lost ground, but so far they're not successful, essentially. And then I just want to provide update on this Klishivka. It's basically no man's land at this point, because it's kind of like in the bottom. So if you kind of, so it doesn't make sense for Ukrainian side to control it, because you're becoming a perfect target, and essentially for Russian the same. So it's the same idea. So it's just too expensive to hold this ground, and then so it becoming no man's land. Now let's move to central Donbass front line. Things again the same, no essential differences. Again, this tactical Russian attacks that don't go anywhere. Nevertheless, they repeat them, and essentially it's quiet here as well. Now let's move to Zaporizhya front line. Things here are mostly characterized by Russian tactical counterattacks, where they try to recapture lost ground again. So, but again, this is all tactical. It's not any kind of offensive. It totally tactical fights. Again, the same areas around this Staromayorsky, and which is Russia still holds on to Orozhaino, which I mentioned before, that they are sort of come as a package, but so far they still manage to hold on to Orozhaino as of now. and then Russian troops trying to push Ukrainian forces a little bit further from this village Robotine. It's actually not totally correctly shown on the map, but Ukrainian troops essentially on the northern edge of Robotine. Basically, the fight is happening around for Robotine at this point, and Russian troops are trying to push Ukrainian forces a little bit further up north. But otherwise, again, this is all quiet here as well. And then last section of the front line along Dnipro River, things here also quiet, status quo, no changes. Ukrainian troops do control, all of this bridgeheads here. I may not be even sort of up to date and correct on all of the bridgeheads, but essentially there is no expansion from the existing bridgeheads. Maybe there are new ones that sort of popping up, but they are not sort of I would say operational where there is desire to exploit them. We're probably still in a stage where Ukrainian side is basically increasing them in quantity, and this doesn't switch into quality. And by quality, I mean trying to exploit and expand those bridgeheads. And the Russian side is also not active in dislodging this bridgeheads. Essentially, it's just, as I said, status quo. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Until next time.